He walked in unnoticed, dressed down and tired. They dismissed him, assumed he didn't belong. What they didn't know? He was the one who owned it all. Jerome stepped into the trendy downtown restaurant, his worn sneakers squeaking lightly on the polished floor. His faded jacket clung to his shoulders, a stark contrast to the sleek, modern decor around him. The soft hum of conversation mixed with the faint clinking of glasses and the sizzle from the kitchen in the back. It was a place that buzzed with energy, a hotspot for the city's movers and shakers. But Jerome was neither a mover nor a shaker in the eyes of the staff, at least not yet. He moved to the hostess stand, where a young woman with a bright smile greeted him, though it quickly faltered when she glanced at his attire. Her eyes scanned him, judging the threadbare jacket, the scuff marks on his shoes. She hesitated, her smile now thin and unwelcoming. "Table for one?" she asked, her tone clipped. Jerome nodded. "Yes, please." She didn't immediately pick up a menu or gesture to show him to a table. Instead, she looked around the restaurant. The place was busy, but she was less concerned about seating him and more focused on the impression he might be making on the other guests. She leaned closer, lowering her voice just enough for him to hear. "We're pretty full right now. If you don't mind waiting, I can get you something in a few minutes," she said, her words carrying a subtle hint of condescension. Jerome stood quietly, not a word of protest leaving his lips. He had learned long ago that the best response was often silence, but it was clear to him now that the woman had made assumptions about him, assumptions based on his appearance. He waited, shifting his weight slightly as she looked back at the waiting guests, perhaps hoping no one would notice him standing there. Her eyes darted to the door, searching for someone more fitting of a table. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she gestured toward the small bench near the entrance. "You can sit there for now," she said. Jerome, ever patient, didn't take offense. He merely walked over and sat down. It wasn't the first time he'd been treated like this because of his appearance. After all, it wasn't unusual for someone to mistake him for a homeless man looking for scraps. The truth was far from it. Jerome was one of the silent investors in this very restaurant, a majority owner, but no one had ever questioned him or looked beyond the surface. He was just another face in the crowd to them, a reminder of how people often saw only what they wanted to see. As he sat, he scanned the room. He could see the lively chatter at the tables, the laughter shared over drinks, and the staff moving swiftly between them. It wasn't his first time in this place, but it was the first time he'd come in so unassuming. His mind wandered to the deals he'd helped broker to get this restaurant off the ground, the countless hours of meetings, the quiet investments that had led to the success it now enjoyed. He wasn't just a customer, he was the one who helped make this all happen. But today, no one knew that. The hostess continued her rounds, delivering menus and leading guests to their seats. She passed by him several times, but each time she ignored his presence, as if he didn't exist. He could feel her eyes on him, but it wasn't the curious gaze of someone wondering about his story. It was the look of someone unsure if they should even acknowledge him. After all, he didn't fit the profile of a paying guest. To her, Jerome was invisible. But just as he was beginning to feel the weight of that discomfort, the manager came out of the back. Jerome knew him well, a man named Dave, who had run the front of house since the restaurant's opening. Dave's eyes fell on Jerome, and the friendly smile that usually greeted him faltered for just a moment. He quickly masked it, but the brief hesitation didn't go unnoticed. "Is everything okay here, sir?" Dave asked, giving a polite smile as he scanned Jerome's attire. "I'm just fine," Jerome replied softly. "I'm waiting for a table." "Oh, right," Dave said, clearly uncomfortable. He looked around, trying to see if anyone else was free to help the man in front of him, but no one had yet come by. I'll just let you know when a spot opens up." Jerome nodded, his gaze shifting back to the entrance. He didn't need to say anything. The situation spoke for itself. For all the care and attention the staff poured into serving others, the moment they encountered someone who didn't match their ideal image of a customer, they faltered. They were ready to dismiss him because of his worn jacket, his quiet demeanor. They saw what they wanted to see and judged accordingly. For the next few minutes, Jerome sat there in silence, letting the tension in the air hang between him and the staff. It wasn't an unfamiliar feeling, but he wasn't here to make a scene. His presence wasn't to draw attention. It was to see if this restaurant, this place he had a stake in, truly stood for the values it claimed. As he continued to wait, he caught sight of another guest entering the restaurant. This person, dressed sharply in a suit and tie, was greeted immediately with a warm welcome. The hostess smiled broadly, her voice sweet as she ushered him toward a prime table by the window. Jerome couldn't help but note the difference in treatment, the effortless respect given to the well-dressed man and the cool indifference shown to him. It wasn't just about the seat, it was about the assumption that only certain types of people deserved respect. This was the truth of the situation, and it stung. He sat for a few more moments, collecting his thoughts, before he stood up slowly. He was done waiting. His patience had served its purpose. He walked toward the hostess stand, ready to do what he had come here for. Jerome approached the hostess stand with quiet confidence, his steps measured and calm. Emily, the young receptionist, glanced up, her smile faltering as she recognized him standing there. She had been busy overseeing the room, but now her attention was fully on Jerome, who stood at the counter, not a homeless man asking for pity, but a silent figure whose presence could no longer be ignored. "Excuse me," Jerome said softly, his voice steady and calm. "Are you sure we're fully booked? I saw a few rooms listed as available on your system." Emily's gaze flickered nervously toward the computer screen behind her, still showing several vacant spots. She cleared her throat, seemingly thrown off by the polite inquiry. "Uh, well, maybe they're reserved for VIP guests or something," she stammered. "The system might not have updated yet." Jerome could tell she wasn't sure of herself, and her response felt more like an attempt to dismiss him than an actual explanation. He stood quietly for a moment, just observing her as she shifted uncomfortably, obviously uneasy under his gaze. "I don't mind waiting," he said, his tone not confrontational, but curious. "But I just wanted to make sure I wasn't being overlooked." Emily seemed to fumble with her words, her discomfort growing. She wasn't used to being challenged, and the situation was spiraling beyond her control. But Jerome's calm presence didn't show any signs of pushing her to react hastily. Instead, he simply gave her a moment to collect herself. Then, just as he was about to turn away, Jerome leaned forward slightly, and with a quiet confidence that made her pause, he asked, "Do you know who I am?" Emily blinked, her brow furrowing in confusion. No. Should I?" Jerome smiled, but it wasn't one of arrogance. It was a smile of understanding, a smile that revealed he knew exactly how this situation would unfold. "I'm the founder and CEO of this restaurant. I own the majority of it, in fact." The words hung in the air for a beat longer than Emily was comfortable with. Her eyes widened, the color draining from her face. The moment of realization hit her hard. The man she had been dismissing, the one she had assumed was just another person with no business being in such a place, was the very person who had helped build the foundation of this restaurant. I'm so sorry," Emily stuttered, scrambling for an apology, her voice breaking as she recognized her error. "I didn't realize. I thought—" "I know what you thought," Jerome interrupted, his voice still calm but now carrying a hint of disappointment. "But that's the problem, isn't it? You assumed I didn't belong here because of how I looked. And when I didn't meet your idea of a customer, I became invisible to you." Emily was silent for a moment, her head hanging low, too embarrassed to say much more. Jerome didn't press further, but he let the weight of his words sink in, knowing full well that the point had been made. He wasn't angry. He didn't need to be. The situation was self-explanatory. Before Emily could respond further, the restaurant manager, Dave, emerged from the kitchen, his sharp eyes scanning the room until they landed on Jerome. His demeanor shifted almost immediately, his shoulders straightening. "Jerome," Dave greeted him, the nervousness in his voice betraying his earlier attempt to look composed. "I didn't know you were coming today. Is there something you need help with?" Jerome gave him a small nod, but instead of taking up his usual seat, he motioned toward the hostess stand. "I was just wondering about the availability of a table. I've been waiting, and I've noticed a few things I think we need to address." Dave's eyes darted between Emily and Jerome, the realization creeping in. Jerome's presence wasn't an accident. He wasn't some unimportant guest. He was the owner, and his calm demeanor had just exposed an uncomfortable truth about how the staff treated certain customers. "Of course, Mr. Hart, let me get a table ready for you right away," Dave said, his tone shifting to one of respectful urgency. "Please, follow me." Jerome didn't move immediately. Instead, he looked at Emily, still standing at the hostess stand, now flushed with humiliation. He didn't want to make her feel smaller than she already did, but he needed to make sure she understood the lesson that was unfolding. "You might want to remember this," Jerome said, his voice even but firm. "What you see on the outside doesn't tell you anything about who someone is or what they've achieved. Judging people based on their appearance only makes it easier to miss the ones who can actually make a difference." Emily opened her mouth to respond, but Jerome turned and followed Dave to a vacant table, the young receptionist still lost in the weight of his words. Dave led him to a seat by the window, his attempt at small talk failing under the quiet pressure Jerome emitted. As Jerome sat down, he placed his jacket beside him, his fingers lightly grazing the fabric. He'd worked for everything in this restaurant, yet his journey had begun in places where people didn't think someone like him had a chance. The staff had no idea who he truly was until now, and they had learned the hard way that appearances weren't always what they seemed. Jerome settled into his seat, his eyes drifting out the window as he thought about what he'd seen today. The restaurant's success wasn't just about great food or a trendy design. It was about the respect they showed people. That respect needed to be more than just an image, more than just something customers were expected to feel. It had to be the foundation, and he was about to make sure it would be. The dinner rush was beginning, and Jerome could hear the sounds of silverware clinking and laughter filtering through the restaurant's bustling atmosphere. But none of it was truly reaching him. He was still seated at the table by the window, contemplating the day's events. The restaurant had once been his dream, and now, as he sat in the same spot where so many others dined, he realized that his success had to be more than just about good food and trendy decor. Jerome knew that leadership wasn't defined by the size of the office, the number of employees, or even the amount of money invested. Leadership, in its purest form, was about influence, about making people feel seen, valued, and respected. And as he glanced across the room, he realized that somewhere along the way, his restaurant had lost sight of that. Minutes passed, and then Dave reappeared, walking up to Jerome's table, his face flushed. He had clearly been working hard in the back, trying to juggle the demands of a busy night. But Jerome's demeanor and the unexpected challenge had forced him to rethink the way things were done in the restaurant. "Mr. Hart," Dave said, adjusting his tie awkwardly. I'm sorry about earlier. I didn't realize you were here for an inspection, or that you'd be looking at things so closely." Jerome's gaze remained steady, but there was no hint of anger in his eyes, just understanding. "Dave, This isn't about what happened earlier. This is about something much bigger. I'm not just here as a guest tonight. I'm here to help you all see the truth that's been hiding in plain sight." Dave didn't respond right away, but his shoulders sagged, as if he had been expecting this moment for a while. The weight of Jerome's words was sinking in. "Do you realize that a guest was treated like that because of their appearance?" Jerome continued, his tone calm but heavy. "People think they can just assume someone's worth based on how they're dressed, where they come from, or even the color of their skin. But those assumptions can be dangerous. You saw what happened with Emily earlier, and that's just the beginning." Dave nodded, guilt creeping across his face. "I know. I wasn't there to stop it. I should have done something." Jerome shook his head gently. "It's not just about stopping it. It's about changing the culture. We need to make sure that everyone who walks through these doors, no matter who they are, feels like they matter. I didn't build this place to be exclusive. I built it to be a reflection of everything I've fought for." Dave remained silent, but he understood. Jerome's words were striking at something deeper. The truth was that many people, like him, had grown up with experiences that taught them not to be seen, especially not by the people in power. But Jerome had fought his way to the top, never letting anyone define who he was or what he could do. "Tell me," Jerome said, folding his arms as he leaned back in his chair, "how many times have you heard someone on this team say, 'Oh, he doesn't look like he belongs here,' or 'She looks like she's not our type of guest'?" Dave looked around nervously. I, I've heard that a few times, but it's not intentional. We've just always been focused on providing high-end service to high-end clients." Jerome smiled, but there was no humor in it. "That's the problem right there. Service is service. Respect is respect. Whether it's a corporate CEO or someone in a hoodie, we should be treating everyone with the same dignity." Dave stood still, taking in the weight of Jerome's words. Jerome wasn't asking for an apology. He was asking for change. Jerome had worked tirelessly to create an environment that stood out from the rest, but something had gone wrong along the way. He had built this restaurant to offer a sense of belonging, but it had become a place of exclusion, judging people before they even had a chance to step through the door. "Let's fix that," Jerome finally said, his voice firm but not harsh. "I'm going to give you the tools, and we're going to fix it together." A moment of silence stretched between them before Dave nodded. Jerome wasn't looking for applause or recognition. He wasn't here for revenge. He was here to make sure that this place became what it was meant to be from the very beginning. "I want a meeting with the staff," Jerome continued. "We're going to talk about this. We'll go over the changes I want to make, and we'll ensure that no one feels invisible anymore." Dave's eyes widened. "A staff meeting? But it's so busy tonight." Jerome's gaze softened slightly. "This isn't a maybe situation. This is the culture of this restaurant, and it starts with us. I don't care how busy it gets. It's a priority. Everyone needs to understand what we stand for here, or we risk losing everything." Dave nodded again, his posture straightening with a sense of determination. He'd been handed a lesson he would never forget. Jerome's calm authority had shown him the difference between simply managing a restaurant and leading one. As Jerome finished his drink and stood up, he placed a hand on Dave's shoulder. "I'm going to take a walk, but I expect the meeting to happen soon. You have my trust, but now I need you to show me that you'll act on it." With that, Jerome walked away from the table, his presence still lingering in the room like a quiet force. He had made his point, and now it was time for the rest of the restaurant to catch up. It wasn't about punishment, it was about setting a new standard. The evening passed, and Jerome quietly observed the staff as they continued their duties. Some seemed nervous, others uncomfortable, but they all knew something had shifted in the air. They had been confronted with an undeniable truth. The way they treated people mattered, no matter their station, their appearance, or their history. And Jerome wasn't leaving until he knew this culture had truly changed. The evening rush continued as Jerome observed from the corner of the room, his eyes never leaving the staff members as they moved about their duties. The clink of silverware and the hum of conversation didn't escape his attention, but neither did the palpable tension in the air. He had seen it before, the subtle shifts that came when change was about to take place. Some of the staff, particularly the servers and bartenders, seemed to be waiting for something. The others, though, moved with a sense of apprehension, unsure how they should react to the shift that Jerome had initiated. It was 9:30 p.m. when Jerome finally decided it was time. He stood up from the corner table where he had been watching quietly, his presence still commanding despite the casual clothes he wore. He approached the central area of the restaurant where the majority of the employees were working and made his way to the small dining area where the staff had been directed to meet. It was a small room just off the main dining area, usually used for quick meetings or storage. Tonight, it was a gathering space for something much more significant. As he stepped inside, the staff members shuffled, muttering nervously among themselves. Jerome could see the discomfort in their faces. Some of them were still processing the earlier moments of embarrassment and shock. Others were just trying to figure out how things were going to play out. Jerome took his position at the front of the room, and the chatter died down immediately. The room went quiet, and every eye turned toward him. There was no fanfare, no dramatic gesture. Jerome simply stood, his posture still, and waited for everyone to settle. He spoke first, his voice firm but not harsh, his presence commanding yet quiet. "I know you're all wondering what this is about. I know you're nervous, but tonight isn't about shame. It's about growth, reflection, and making sure we create an environment where everyone feels seen and valued, regardless of their appearance, their job, or their social status." There was a pause as the room absorbed his words. Jerome's gaze swept over the group, noting the different reactions. Some of the staff members looked at each other with guilt written on their faces. Others looked uncertain, not quite understanding the gravity of the situation. He continued, his voice steady, cutting through the tension. "I came here tonight, not just to enjoy a meal, but to remind you of something fundamental. Respect for every person, whether they're sitting at the bar with a tailored suit or at the table in worn-out jeans, is the cornerstone of this place." He took a slow breath, letting his words settle before continuing. "When I created this restaurant, I had a vision. I built it from the ground up. I didn't do it by making assumptions about who deserves to dine here or by treating people based on what they look like. I did it by making sure everyone felt like they mattered." Jerome's eyes locked on Emily, the receptionist who had first dismissed him. She shifted uncomfortably under his gaze, but Jerome didn't show any signs of anger. Instead, his face remained calm, even serene. "I don't know what kind of biases you've been carrying or how long you've let them dictate your actions, but tonight is the moment you get to change that. We're not going to be a restaurant that prides itself on the appearance of our guests. We're going to be a restaurant that prides itself on the way we treat every single person who walks through our door." There was a slight shift in the room. A few heads nodded, though some still seemed uncertain, unsure how to take his words. Jerome knew that the real change would happen not just in the staff's understanding, but in their willingness to act on what he had said. He turned to the group at large. "Respect for all, accessibility for everyone, and accountability in action. These are the new principles we're adopting in this restaurant. I expect every single person in this room, from the front of the house to the kitchen staff, to understand that your role is not just about serving food and drinks. It's about making sure that the people we serve feel like they belong here, no matter who they are, how they're dressed, or where they come from." Jerome paused, looking directly at each employee in the room. "I'm going to be in this restaurant more often, and not just when it's convenient. I want to see how you treat people. And when you see something wrong, I want you to speak up. If you feel someone is being disrespected, whether by a guest or another member of staff, I want you to step in." He paused again, his words hanging in the air like a challenge. "Because if you don't speak up, you're just as responsible. You don't get to hide behind policy or protocol. Our policy is simple: treat everyone with dignity. If you can't do that, then you need to step away." Jerome turned his focus back to Emily. "You're going to work closely with HR to ensure that all of our policies reflect these new principles. You'll also be working with the rest of the staff to rewrite training materials and onboarding processes. We're going to introduce empathy and diversity training, and I'll be holding regular check-ins to see where we are." Emily, still slightly red from the earlier incident, nodded slowly. "Understood, Mr. Hart. I'm sorry for what happened." Jerome gave her a nod of acknowledgement but didn't dwell on the apology. There was more to be done than simply saying sorry. "I want to see real change," he said firmly. "This isn't about a one-time lesson. It's about creating a lasting culture shift. We're going to look at our systems, our protocols, and our people, and make sure everything is aligned with the values we stand for." With that, Jerome ended the meeting. He didn't need to say more. He had spoken his piece, and now it was up to them to do the work. The staff filtered out of the meeting room, some with their heads held high, others still deep in thought. Jerome stood by the door for a moment, watching them leave. His job was done for tonight. He had set the stage for change, but the real work was just beginning. As he walked out of the room, his mind was already focused on what would come next: the implementation, the follow-up, and the changes that would be made. This was only the start. He knew that with his guidance, this restaurant would be better, more inclusive, more respectful, more human, and that was what mattered most. The next morning, the staff was visibly different. It wasn't just that they were all present and accounted for, though that alone showed they had listened. The atmosphere was charged, with a quiet tension hanging in the air, a mix of anticipation, remorse, and the uneasy excitement that comes with change. Jerome knew that today would be pivotal, and that what happened next would set the tone for the restaurant's future. By the time he entered the restaurant, just before the lunch rush, he found the staff already moving about with more purpose, though still tentative. Emily, the receptionist from last night, was at her post, eyes focused and hands busy. She looked up as Jerome walked in, and though her face was still a little flushed from the previous day's events, there was a sense of newness in the way she held herself. The manager, Thomas, was already in the dining area, greeting guests and making sure everything ran smoothly. Jerome approached him quietly, but with intent. "Thomas, how's it going this morning?" Jerome asked, his voice calm and composed. Thomas turned, surprised by the casual question. He wiped his hands on his apron and quickly nodded. "Everything's good. We're adjusting. Some of the staff were a little nervous after last night, but I think they're starting to get it." "Good," Jerome said, letting his approval show with a slight nod. "Keep an eye on the team. Hold them accountable for their actions, not just their words." Thomas nodded again, though it was clear he was still processing the impact of the night before. Jerome could see the subtle change in him, a shift from uncertainty to responsibility. He had always been a decent manager, but now the weight of the expectations Jerome had set hung over him more profoundly. Jerome walked around the restaurant, casually observing the staff as they worked. He wasn't expecting miracles, but he was looking for signs of effort, any small indication that his words had taken root. He watched as the servers treated every customer with more attentiveness, some even going out of their way to make sure they were seen and heard regardless of their appearance or demeanor. In the kitchen, the change was equally evident. The staff there was moving more cohesively, focused on each other's needs as much as on their tasks. They were working together in a way they hadn't before, collaborating on efficiency while ensuring that every dish met the high standards they had set for themselves. It was a quiet revolution, one that started with small adjustments but had the potential to change the entire culture of the restaurant. Later, Jerome called for a quick meeting in the staff lounge. The room was full of the team, their faces still uncertain, but with a quiet understanding that something real was happening. Jerome stood in front of them once again, his posture relaxed, but his presence undeniable. "We're in the middle of something important," he began, his tone easy yet firm. "It's not just about following rules or checking boxes on a list. It's about creating an environment where everyone, no matter who they are, feels like they belong here. We've taken a step forward, but there's more work to be done. You've all heard me talk about the values we stand for, and now it's time to bring them into action." Jerome's eyes scanned the room, making sure everyone was engaged, that they understood the weight of what he was saying. Respect isn't just about smiling at your guests. It's about making sure they're seen, really seen. And not just the VIPs or the regulars who come in wearing the latest trends. It's about the people who walk in quietly, the ones who might not fit the stereotypical mold of who belongs here. They all deserve the same treatment, the same care. If you're going to serve food, you need to serve respect first. The room was silent for a moment, the weight of his words sinking in. Jerome let them sit with it before continuing. "We've also put in place new policies to make sure that bias, unconscious or otherwise, doesn't guide your actions. The empathy training starts this week, and we're going to revisit how we onboard new staff. We want everyone to understand that their actions have a ripple effect on the people we serve, and we are responsible for making sure that ripple is one of inclusion and respect." Jerome paused. He could feel the shift in the room. The discomfort was still there, but it was mixed with something else. Accountability. They were beginning to understand. "I want to thank all of you who have stepped up already, who've embraced the changes," he said, his voice softening just a little. "You don't have to be perfect, but you do have to be real. That's what this restaurant is about. Not just serving food, not just making money, but creating a space where everyone feels like they belong." A few heads nodded in agreement. Jerome could feel the change, however small, in their reactions. It wasn't instantaneous, but it was real, and that was what mattered. "Now, go back out there and show our guests what we stand for," he said, with a final, simple smile. As the staff filtered out of the room, Jerome remained behind for a moment, allowing himself to take in what had just happened. There was still work to be done, and he wasn't naive enough to think everything was perfect after one meeting. But the foundation was laid. The seeds had been planted. Later that evening, as the dinner rush hit, Jerome stayed in the background, quietly observing the service, watching how the staff interacted with guests. He saw small improvements, the way they greeted everyone, the extra effort they put into ensuring that every customer felt like they mattered. When the night finally wound down and the last guests had been served, Jerome approached the bar where Emily had taken a seat. She was still a little nervous, but she had made an effort, he could see that. "How do you feel?" he asked, his voice soft but direct. Emily glanced up at him, her expression honest. "I think I'm starting to understand, Mr. Hart. It's not just about the customers. It's about the staff, too. We all have to treat each other with respect, whether we're serving or being served." Jerome smiled. "Exactly. It's all about respect. And you're getting it. Keep going." Emily smiled back, a little sheepishly, but genuinely grateful. "I will. Thank you." As Jerome left the restaurant that night, he didn't feel the need for any grand gestures. The changes were happening, even if they were small for now. And that was enough. It wasn't about transforming the restaurant overnight. It was about setting a foundation for something deeper, something lasting, something that, one day, would be too strong for anyone to tear down. That night, Jerome walked away knowing that he had done more than just make a point. He had made a difference. And for him, that was the true mark of success.